A discovery in Turkey is rewriting the first chapter of the human story. This place is called Göbekli Tepe, a monumental temple carved from stone over 12,000 years ago, long before the pyramids of Egypt or the stones of Stonehenge. Its existence shatters a fundamental belief about our past. We were taught that farming created civilization, that surplus food allowed people to settle down and only then build temples. But Göbekli Tepe turns that idea upside down. It was built by hunter-gatherers, people we thought were too busy surviving to orchestrate such a feat. By the end of this exploration, you will see human history in an entirely new light, understanding how a single archaeological site forces us to reconsider the very engine of progress. Why would nomadic people move multi-ton stones before they even planted a seed? What powerful belief compelled them to construct a cathedral on a hill, only to deliberately bury it centuries later? The answers redefine what we think it means to be civilized. What does our deepest past tell us about the priorities that truly shape a society? A shepherd first noticed them decades ago, strange stones jutting from the earth of a windswept Turkish hilltop. For years, they were mistaken for nothing more than an old cemetery, a place of more recent loss. The true nature of what lay beneath was completely hidden. That changed in the 1990s when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt arrived. He saw those same stones, the tops of massive T-shaped pillars carved with intricate animal reliefs, and he knew instantly. This was not medieval. This was something profoundly older, and it should not have been there at all. Schmidt described it as a cathedral on a hill, a place of staggering scale built over 12,000 years ago. The prevailing theory of human progress stated clearly that such monuments could only come after agriculture, after people settled into villages and had spare time and resources. But the people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They lived by following herds and foraging wild plants. They had no metal tools, no wheels, no domesticated animals to pull heavy loads. Yet they managed to quarry enormous limestone pillars from nearby bedrock, some weighing more than 20 tons. They carved them with precision, dragging them up the hill and erecting them in great circular enclosures. The logistical challenge is almost incomprehensible. It required not just brute strength, but sophisticated social organization, a shared vision, and a compelling reason to cooperate on a project that would not put food directly on the table. This was the anomaly. The discovery did not simply add a new chapter to the history book. It ripped out the foundational premise of the first chapter and demanded a whole new story be written. The very sequence of civilization, first farming, then temples, was now in question. What belief or need was so powerful that it inspired this monumental work before anything else? The answer lies in the mysterious symbols covering the stones themselves. The pillars themselves are a gallery of a forgotten world. Carved into their limestone surfaces are a menagerie of powerful creatures: foxes, snakes, scorpions, wild boars, and birds of prey, all rendered with a striking artistry that feels both ancient and immediate. They are not mere decorations. These symbols are a language, a complex iconography speaking of myths, spiritual beliefs, and a deep relationship with the natural world that these hunter-gatherers depended upon. To understand the revolution of Göbekli Tepe, you must first understand the story it dismantles. For generations, the narrative of human ascent, called the Neolithic Revolution, was taught as a simple, logical staircase. Step 1. Humans discovered agriculture and learned to farm. Step 2. Farming produced a surplus of food, allowing people to settle down in permanent villages. Step 3. With their basic needs secured, these settled communities could then develop specialized jobs, social hierarchies, and finally, the spare time and resources to build temples and create complex art. Civilization, in this view, was a product of full stomachs and economic security. Göbekli Tepe stands on that timeline like a monumental anachronism, a glaring question mark etched in stone. Radiocarbon dating places its main construction phases firmly between 9,600 and 8,200 before the Common Era. This is a time when, according to the old model, people in this region should have been simple nomadic foragers, not architectural masters. The evidence on the ground reinforces this startling inversion. Archaeologists found no signs of permanent housing at the site, no evidence that people lived there year-round. Instead, they uncovered vast quantities of animal bones from wild species like gazelle and aurochs, the remnants of large-scale feasts. The site itself, with its T-shaped pillars arranged in ritual circles, is purely ceremonial. This paints a vivid and revolutionary picture. It suggests that what brought people together initially was not the practicality of farming, but the powerful, intangible pull of shared belief and ceremony. They gathered seasonally, perhaps from across a wide region, drawn to this sacred hill for rituals we can only guess at. To feed these large gatherings, the theory goes, they may have begun to cultivate the wild grasses growing on the hillside, deliberately sowing and tending them to ensure a predictable food supply for the next gathering. In this light, agriculture wasn't the cause of complex society. It may have been its consequence. As archaeologist Ian Hodder has framed it, society came first. The human need to belong, to share a cosmic story, to create something larger than oneself, might have been the original spark. The temple did not emerge from the village. The village and the farming that sustained it may have emerged from the temple. This idea challenges the very engine we thought drove civilization, shifting the focus from pure material survival to the profound power of collective imagination and belief. Stand before one of these towering T-shaped pillars, and you are not just looking at a stone. You are facing a silent sentinel from a world before writing, its surface alive with a carved menagerie. A powerful boar seems to charge from the limestone. A sleek fox curls in perpetual motion. A crane stretches its graceful neck, while a scorpion raises its tail in eternal warning. This is not random decoration. It is an immersive environment, a stone canvas depicting a cosmos where humans and animals were deeply intertwined. The sheer scale is humbling. These pillars, some standing nearly 20 feet tall and weighing over 16 tons, are arranged in precise concentric circles within large oval enclosures. To enter such a space would have been to step into a story, surrounded on all sides by symbols of power, danger, and perhaps protective spirits. The shape of the pillars themselves is the first great clue. Most researchers now see the distinctive T-shape not as an abstract form, but as a stylized human figure. The top crossbar represents broad shoulders or a head, with subtle carvings sometimes indicating eyes, hands, and a belt. They are silent watchers, perhaps ancestors or deities overseeing the rituals performed within their circle. This transforms the entire enclosure. It is not merely a building. It is a congregation, a gathering of stone beings presiding over the living. Researchers like Professor Jens Nottroff suggest these spaces were designed for theatrical effect. The layout, the carvings, the very acoustics of the stone circles would have amplified chants, music, and storytelling. Imagine a community gathering in flickering torchlight, shadows dancing across the animal reliefs as elders recounted myths of creation or guides led initiates through rites of passage. These shared, intense experiences would have forged powerful social bonds, reinforcing a common identity and a shared understanding of the world. The technical mastery behind this theater is equally astounding. Using only stone tools, these builders quarried monolithic blocks from the nearby bedrock. They shaped them with remarkable precision, carved intricate reliefs, and then transported them up the hill. The architectural knowledge required to plan these circles, to ensure stability, and possibly even to roof them, speaks of a sophisticated tradition. This was not a one-time project. It was a multi-generational endeavor, a sacred blueprint passed down through decades, perhaps centuries. What does this profound investment reveal about their priorities? They poured their greatest collective effort not into storehouses for grain or walls for defense, but into a temple. Their surplus of labor, coordination, and artistic skill was dedicated to the spiritual realm. This suggests a world where connection to the unseen, to the forces of nature and the memory of ancestors, was the most essential foundation of community. The animals they carved so meticulously were not just fauna. They were messengers, teachers, and guardians, their images holding the keys to a belief system we are only beginning to decipher. This stone bestiary is a frozen storybook, its pages open to the sky. Each creature carved into the pillars, from the coiled serpent to the soaring vulture, is a deliberate character in a lost narrative. To the people of Göbekli Tepe, these animals were far more than food or threat. They were likely spiritual forces, clan totems, or even celestial symbols, acting as mediators between the everyday world and a powerful, unseen realm. This concept, seen in hunter-gatherer societies across the globe, is often called totemism or shamanistic practice. It is a worldview where animals possess wisdom, power, and a direct connection to the spiritual. The specific choices at Göbekli Tepe are telling. There is a striking emphasis on creatures of danger and transition. Vultures, associated with the cycle of life and the journey after passing, appear frequently. Snakes, symbols of rebirth and hidden knowledge, coil across the stone. Scorpions and fierce predators like foxes and lions dominate the imagery. This was not a peaceful pastoral scene. It was a symbolic landscape populated by beings of raw power, perhaps representing the very real perils of the wild, or embodying protective spirits meant to guard the sacred space. Among the most intriguing motifs are the strange, H-shaped carvings often interpreted as bags or buckets, held by the abstract human figures on the pillars. Some researchers, like those examining similar symbols in later Mesopotamian art, suggest these could represent vessels of spiritual knowledge or the essence of life itself. They hint at a mythology where certain individuals, leaders, shamans, or ritual specialists were custodians of sacred wisdom. The act of carving itself becomes a profound clue. To invest such immense effort into depicting these animals in a permanent, monumental form suggests that representation held immense power. By fixing the image of a wild bull or a raptor in stone, the community may have believed they were capturing its spirit, asserting a form of ritual control over the natural forces it represented, or ensuring its protective presence. This level of symbolic complexity reveals a society capable of highly abstract thought and shared cultural meaning. It points to a cohesive identity built around a common spiritual vision, one powerful enough to coordinate labor across generations. This forces a fascinating question. How was such a sophisticated project organized? There are no signs of a royal palace, no grand tombs for a single ruler, no evidence of a centralized, coercive state. The society that built Göbekli Tepe appears to have been a different kind of civilization, one orchestrated not by a king with an army, but by a shared belief so compelling it could move mountains, or at least 20-ton pillars. How do you build a cathedral without a king? The mystery of Göbekli Tepe deepens when you look for the expected signs of command. There are no grand tombs for a ruling elite, no palaces towering over humble dwellings, no storehouses hoarding wealth, and no fortifications suggesting conflict. What we find instead is a profound paradox, a monument of staggering complexity that seems to have been built by a society without a state. To grasp this, try a simple thought experiment. Imagine organizing the construction of a massive sports stadium or a concert hall in your own community. but without any central government, without money as payment, and without the ability to force anyone to participate. The project would rely entirely on shared belief, voluntary cooperation, and a tradition so compelling that people would travel great distances, contribute their labor for weeks, and pass the blueprint down to their children. This is the social puzzle of Göbekli Tepe. It points to a form of non-hierarchical complexity, where large groups of hunter-gatherers from across the region may have gathered seasonally, drawn by a powerful religious ideology. They came together not under the whip of a pharaoh, but under the shared weight of a sacred purpose. Anthropologists like David Graeber and David Wengrow, in their work The Dawn of Everything, point to sites like this as evidence that early human societies experimented with many social forms. They argue that our ancestors were not simply on a slow march from simple bands to complex states. Instead, they consciously adopted different ways of living at different times. The builders of Göbekli Tepe may have mastered what Graeber and Wengrow call the art of seasonal gathering, creating temporary, large-scale communities for specific ritual projects, then dispersing again. The logistics alone boggle the mind. This was not haphazard construction. It required advanced planning, a clear division of labor, and the sustained feeding of a large workforce. The bones of wild game suggest massive communal feasts, turning the act of building into a ritual of sharing. Most astonishingly, the precise architectural knowledge and the consistent artistic style had to be transmitted across generations without written language, a testament to a vibrant oral and practical tradition. This implies a social contract woven from ritual obligation and collective identity. Your place in the community, your sense of belonging and meaning, was tied to your contribution to this eternal project. The temple was the glue. It provided a cosmic story that justified the effort and organized the labor. This model turns another assumption on its head. We often think monumental architecture is proof of inequality, of a powerful few commanding the many. But here, the greatest collective achievement appears to have been for a collective purpose, creating a society held together not by fear or force, but by a shared story carved in stone. This makes the final act at Göbekli Tepe perhaps the most enigmatic of all. Why, after centuries of sacred work, did they deliberately bury their entire cathedral, filling the majestic circles with rubble until they vanished from the world for 12,000 years? The final act at Göbekli Tepe is perhaps its most profound mystery. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the people who had poured generations of devotion into this sacred hill did something extraordinary. They became its gravediggers. With immense care, they backfilled their magnificent stone circles, burying the towering pillars under hundreds of tons of soil, rubble, stone tools, and animal bones. This was not an act of destruction or conquest. It was a deliberate, ritualistic entombment, a conscious retirement of their own cathedral. The evidence is clear and compelling. Archaeologists found no signs of violent conflict, no fire, no sudden collapse. Instead, they uncovered layers of clean fill material, deliberately brought in to seal the enclosures. This points to a planned communal decision, a final ceremony to close a powerful chapter. It feels like a conscious farewell. So why would a society choose to bury its greatest spiritual achievement? One leading theory connects directly to the revolution the site represents. As the communities around Göbekli Tepe gradually transitioned to farming and more settled village life, their world was changing. The old ways, the hunter-gatherer rituals, and the cosmology carved into these stones may have been losing their central meaning. The temple, built for a nomadic, seasonal gathering society, could have become obsolete. Burying it might have been a way to honor its power while acknowledging a new era was beginning. Yet another, more symbolic interpretation suggests the burial was not an end, but the ultimate ritual. In many ancient worldviews, entombing something sacred was not an act of disrespect, but of consecration. By giving the temple back to the earth, the community could have been performing a final offering, sealing its spiritual energy within the land to protect it forever. This act of reverence is precisely what preserved the site in near-perfect condition for millennia, saving the carvings from erosion and later human interference. It was a time capsule intentionally created. This deliberate closure marks a pivotal moment in the human story. It represents a profound cultural and spiritual transition, the closing of one chapter of human belief as another began. The burial of Göbekli Tepe forces us to ask what happens when a society's deepest stories change. How do you respectfully lay to rest the pillars of your old world? And what legacy did this forgotten temple leave behind as those first farmers walked away from the buried hill, their lives and beliefs forever transformed? The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe was not an ending but a transition. While the great temple slept beneath its hill, the ideas it represented did not vanish. They rippled outward, part of a vast, interconnected world awakening across the ancient Near East. This period, known to archaeologists as the pre-pottery Neolithic A, or PPNA, was not a landscape of isolated villages. It was a network, a fertile crescent of innovation stretching from the Jordan Valley to the plains of Anatolia. Sites like Jericho, with its astonishing stone tower and wall, or the later, dense settlement of Catalhoyuk, with its art-filled houses, were not copies of Göbekli Tepe. They were distinct expressions of a shared cultural ferment, nodes in a web where people, symbols, and knowledge began to flow. Think of it as an ancient conversation happening across hundreds of miles. While these communities had their own unique identities, they shared a common symbolic language and architectural ideas. The most compelling evidence comes from other sites in southeastern Turkey itself. At a place called Nevali Kori, archaeologists uncovered a structure built a few centuries after Göbekli Tepe's main phase. Within it stood familiar, smooth, T-shaped limestone pillars. While smaller, their form and function within a ritual space point unmistakably to a shared tradition, a regional blueprint for sacred architecture that persisted. This suggests that the knowledge required to plan and erect these monuments, the sophisticated understanding of geometry, quarrying, and communal labor, was not lost. It was a technology of belief, and it traveled. This cultural interaction was the engine of acceleration. Skilled artisans or ritual specialists may have moved between gathering sites, carrying not just techniques but stories and symbols. A motif carved at one center might inspire artists at another, adapted to local meanings. This exchange of ideas created a feedback loop where innovations in social organization, art, and spirituality could spread and refine much faster than any single community could develop them alone. The revolution was not a light bulb switching on in one place. It was a slow sunrise illuminating an entire region. Crucially, this interconnected world provides stunning support for Göbekli Tepe's central riddle. That belief may have spurred farming. Genetic studies of ancient plants have pinpointed the very heart of southeastern Turkey, the region surrounding Göbekli Tepe, as the likely birthplace for the domestication of einkorn wheat, one of humanity's first and most important crops. This is not a coincidence. The wild ancestors of these grains grew on those same hills. The theory that large, seasonal gatherings at ritual centers created a demand for predictable food finds powerful circumstantial evidence here. To feed the builders and participants, these communities may have begun to consciously cultivate the wild grasses, protecting them, selecting the best seeds, and slowly, over generations, transforming them into domesticated crops. The ritual center did not just demand stone, it demanded bread. This reframes the entire dawn of civilization. There was no single cradle, no lone garden of Eden where everything began. Instead, there was a networked cradle, a vibrant, communicating landscape of many places experimenting with new ways to live, worship, and sustain themselves. Göbekli Tepe stands as the earliest and most dramatic expression of this process, a proof that the human impulse to create meaning together could achieve the monumental long before kings or empires. It forces us to look at other supposed firsts with new eyes, to see the deep, collaborative currents of innovation that truly shape our world. And if this temple was part of a network, what happened to the society that built it? The answer lies not in grand collapse, but in a quieter, more profound transformation that reshaped humanity's relationship with the earth itself. The true shock of Göbekli Tepe arrived not from the stones themselves, but from a laboratory. When the first samples of charcoal and animal bone, carefully extracted from the earliest construction layers, were subjected to radiocarbon dating, the results sent a tremor through the archaeological world. The calibrated dates returned again and again to a window between 9,600 and 8,200 before the Common Era. This placed the main construction firmly in the 10th millennium BCE, a time so profoundly ancient it seemed to belong to a different species of history altogether. Radiocarbon dating works by measuring the decay of a radioactive isotope, carbon-14, in organic materials. All living things absorb carbon-14 from the atmosphere, and when they pass, the isotope decays at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring how much remains in a sample, scientists can calculate its age. At Göbekli Tepe, the charcoal from ancient fires and the bones from ritual feasts provided a perfect clock embedded in the site's very foundation. These dates were not vague estimates. They were precise, repeatable, and anchored in the immutable laws of physics. Dating specialists confirmed the methodology was sound. The calibration against known tree ring records was correct. The timeline was unassailable. This scientific certainty slammed shut the door on any comfortable theories that the site might be a later, simpler structure misdated. The stones were as old as the numbers said they were. The story of this antiquity is written vertically in the ground in the site's stratigraphy. A tell or settlement mound is built layer by layer over centuries, like a book where the earliest chapters are at the bottom. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists meticulously peeled back these layers. The topmost held the debris of the site's deliberate burial. Below that, they found evidence of later, smaller structures. But at the very base, they uncovered the monumental stone circles, the largest and most sophisticated enclosures, filled with the most elaborate carvings. This vertical sequence was undeniable proof. The greatest work was the oldest work. Each layer was a time capsule, with the fill material between the massive pillars containing the very organic samples that gave up their age. This stratigraphic clarity transformed the site from a curious anomaly into an irrefutable fact. It forced a recalibration not of instruments, but of the human story. The scientific data proved that hunter-gatherers, at this specific moment in deep history, achieved a level of social complexity and symbolic expression that textbooks had reserved for settled farmers millennia later. This revelation echoes beyond this Turkish hilltop. It asks us to look with fresh eyes at other enigmatic sites around the globe, wonders whose origins seem to stretch back into the mist of prehistory, and to wonder what other chapters of our collective past are waiting, patiently buried, to rewrite the story we think we know. This silent stone temple compels us to ask a deeper question about ourselves. Have we fundamentally misunderstood our own ancestors, viewing them as primitive survivors rather than visionary architects of meaning? Göbekli Tepe is not just an archaeological site, it is a psychological mirror, reflecting a core aspect of human nature we often relegate to the background of our story. To interpret its message, we turn to a field known as cognitive archaeology, which uses physical remains to infer the minds of the people who left them behind. The pillars and their carvings are not tools for hunting or farming. They are tools for thought, for storytelling, for connecting to a realm beyond the immediate. They prove that the capacity for abstract thought, for complex long-term planning, and for profound artistic expression was fully mature in humanity long before the first city wall was raised or the first written symbol was etched. This was not a proto-civilization. This was a civilization of the mind. The philosopher John Searle explored a concept called collective intentionality, the human ability to assign shared functions and meanings to objects and actions. A piece of paper becomes money because we all agree it does. A stone circle becomes a temple because a community invests it with sacred significance. Göbekli Tepe is a monumental testament to this power. Its construction required more than just muscle. It required a shared story so compelling that hundreds of people, over generations, could coordinate around a single, breathtaking vision. They collectively intended those T-shaped stones to be ancestral figures, those carved animals to be spiritual guardians. This shared belief was the invisible blueprint, the true architecture that held the project together. This leads to an in-depth realization about the human drive itself. We often frame our history as a relentless battle for survival, a materialist march where food, shelter, and security come first, and art, spirituality, and philosophy are luxurious afterthoughts. Göbekli Tepe inverts that hierarchy. Here, the drive to create meaning, to connect with something larger than oneself, to ritualize existence and honor the cosmos, appears as a primary force. It was not a cultural decoration added after survival was secured. It was the very engine that organized society and may have even spurred the technological revolution of agriculture. The temple came before the granary, the symbol came before the settlement. This perspective quietly challenges some of our most ingrained narratives about progress. It suggests that spirituality and communal art are not optional extras in the human experience. They are fundamental, shaping forces of our nature. Our ancestors were not just struggling to live, they were striving to make life meaningful, to build legacies in stone that would outlast them. This changes how we might view our own modern pursuits. In a world often focused on material gain and individual achievement, Göbekli Tepe stands as a 12,000-year-old reminder that our deepest impulses may lean toward building together, toward creating beauty and shared purpose, and toward answering questions that have nothing to do with mere survival. What kind of cathedrals, literal or metaphorical, are we building today, and what do they say about what we truly value? The allure of a mystery this profound is that it invites the mind to wander. When faced with such a monumental gap in our understanding, there is a natural human impulse to fill it with stories, often grander and more dramatic than the evidence may support. Göbekli Tepe, sitting at the dawn of civilization, has become a magnet for speculative theories, from lost continents like Atlantis to visitors from beyond our world. While these narratives are compelling, they share a common flaw. They often leap over the tangible, intricate evidence left behind by the very real people who built this place. To truly honor their achievement, we must practice a form of respectful skepticism, grounding our wonder in the soil and stone they themselves touched. Mainstream archaeology does not dismiss mystery. It seeks to solve it through a meticulous process of hypothesis, excavation, and peer review. This scientific framework is our best tool for listening to what the past is actually telling us, rather than projecting our own fantasies onto it. Leading archaeologists working at the site, like those from the German Archaeological Institute, consistently emphasize this evidence-based approach. They point to specific details that challenge popular myths. For instance, a frequent claim suggests the pillars are arranged as a perfect map of the constellation Orion or other star patterns as they appeared 12,000 years ago. While the layout is undoubtedly intentional and meaningful, rigorous archaeoastronomical analysis has not found conclusive, precise alignments that would support such a specific celestial blueprint. The patterns are more likely symbolic, woven into a local cosmology rather than serving as an exact astronomical observatory. Similarly, Interpretations of the animal carvings as depictions of alien beings or records of a global cataclysm ignore the rich context of Neolithic symbolism found across the region. These powerful images of foxes, vultures, and scorpions fit seamlessly into a spiritual world where animals were seen as mediators between worlds, as clan totems, and as representations of natural forces. To see them as literal portraits of extraterrestrials is to strip them of their deeper, culturally specific meaning. This process of critical evaluation is not about draining the site of its wonder. It is quite the opposite. By carefully separating fact from fiction, we protect the site's genuine, earth-shattering importance. The real revolution of Göbekli Tepe, that hunter-gatherers achieved monumental architecture driven by shared belief, is astonishing enough. It does not need embellishment from lost super-civilizations. That grounded understanding allows us to turn our attention to the most human evidence of all, the fragments of daily life that reveal who these people really were. Standing within one of those ancient stone circles, you would have been enveloped by more than just sight. The very air might have hummed with power. An emerging area of research suggests that the architects of Göbekli Tepe designed not just for the eyes but for the ears, weaving sound itself into the fabric of their rituals. This field, known as archaeoacoustics, studies how ancient structures interact with sound waves, and preliminary investigations at the site reveal something remarkable. The dense limestone pillars, arranged in tight circles and set within solid stone walls, would have created a unique acoustic environment. Chants, drum beats, or even the rhythmic striking of stones would not have simply dissipated into the open air. They would have reverberated, echoing between the monoliths, creating a layered, immersive soundscape that physically vibrated through the participants. It was a built environment that could turn human voice and rhythm into an overwhelming sensory experience. Researchers like Stephen J. Waller have drawn parallels with other ancient sites, from European caves painted with animals to the great cathedrals of later eras, where specific acoustic effects like echoes or fluttering reverberations were almost certainly part of ceremonial life. At Göbekli Tepe, the acoustics may have served a profound psychological purpose. The consistent, rhythmic noise within such a confined, resonant space is known to affect brainwave patterns, potentially inducing states of heightened awareness or trance. This was not an accidental byproduct of architecture. It was likely a subtle, intuitive technology of the mind. In a shamanistic context, such sound-induced states could have been pathways to the spiritual world, a means for ritual specialists to journey, or for the community to collectively feel the presence of the powerful beings depicted on the stones around them. This auditory dimension deepens our understanding of the site's sophistication. The design implies a keen awareness of psychoacoustics, how sound perception influences emotion and consciousness. The thunderous echo of a drum might have been perceived as the voice of an ancestral spirit emerging from the earth. The unified chanting of dozens of voices, amplified and focused by the stone circle, would have forged an undeniable sense of group unity, dissolving individual boundaries into a collective whole. This powerful auditory bonding, combined with the visual drama of the carvings and the physical exertion of the rituals, created a total immersive experience. It was a carefully orchestrated ceremony meant to alter perception and solidify belief. This leads to a tangible yet equally mysterious question. What fueled these intense gatherings? What did people consume during these long rituals to sustain their energy and perhaps further alter their shared reality? The ground beneath the stones holds another kind of story, told not in carved reliefs but in broken bones. Excavations at Göbekli Tepe have uncovered staggering quantities of animal remains, hundreds of thousands of fragments from creatures like the wild aurochs, a massive ancestor of cattle, swift gazelle, and the now extinct wild ass. This is not the casual debris of a small camp. This is the archaeological signature of a feast, repeated over centuries on a truly epic scale. Picture the scene that must have unfolded seasonally on this windswept plateau. From across the region, groups of hunter-gatherers would have converged, drawn by the sacred call of the temple. They arrived not as a small band, but as a temporary city of hundreds. Their first collective task was not construction, but procurement. Coordinated hunting parties would set out to bring down enough game to feed this vast assembly for the duration of their ritual gathering. The air would have been thick with the smoke of countless roasting fires, the sound of flint knives against bone, and the communal hum of a society coming together. This was feasting as a fundamental social technology. For these early people, sharing food on such a massive scale was far more than just eating. It was the glue of community. It forged and reaffirmed alliances between different family groups and clans. It was a powerful act of reciprocity and trust, a tangible demonstration that the whole group would ensure no one went hungry during this sacred time. In many cultures, feasts are also where status is negotiated. Yet at Göbekli Tepe, the evidence hints at something different. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the consumption and the way the bones were processed suggests a focus on collective participation rather than elite privilege. Zooarchaeologists, scientists who study animal remains from ancient sites, provide a forensic lens on these gatherings. Their analysis of the bones reveals meticulous patterns. Cut marks show standardized butchery practices, a consistent way of breaking down the carcasses that points to organized, shared knowledge. Importantly, the bones are primarily from healthy, prime-aged animals, and the parts found are the meatiest limbs and ribs. This is significant. In an everyday settlement, you would expect to find a full range of bones from all parts of the animal, including less nutritious bits. At Göbekli Tepe, the selective presence of prime cuts tells us this was special, curated consumption. The less desirable parts were likely processed elsewhere. This was not about scraping together a meal. It was about provisioning a ceremonial event with the best the land could offer, a deliberate offering of abundance to the community, and perhaps to the spirits watching from the stone pillars. This brings us to a revolutionary idea often called the feasting theory of domestication. The logic is compelling. Organizing these monumental gatherings year after year created a predictable, massive demand for food. Relying solely on hunting wild game is a risky strategy. What if the herds were not where you expected them? This pressure, the need to reliably feed the builders and participants of the temple, may have provided the crucial incentive for innovation. To ensure the feast, people might have begun to manage the wild world around them more intensively. They could have started protecting stands of wild wheat and barley on the hillsides, weeding around them, and later deliberately sowing the best seeds. They might have begun to corral young wild animals like aurochs or pigs, controlling their movement to have a more readily available supply. In this light, agriculture and herding were not discovered by accident by people seeking an easier life. They may have been invented as a logistical solution to a spiritual problem. The temple demanded a predictable food surplus, and so the community developed the means to produce one. This reframes Göbekli Tepe's role entirely. It was not merely a passive temple where people came to worship. It was an active catalyst, a social and ritual engine that, through its very existence, created the selective pressure for the economic revolution that would reshape the planet. The need to gather, to feast, and to build together in the name of shared belief may have been the precise spark that ignited the Neolithic flame. The silent stone figures of Göbekli Tepe did not speak their final word when the earth covered them. Their form, that distinctive T-shape, echoes across the map of ancient history, a ghostly blueprint that reappears in the sacred landscapes of civilizations that would rise thousands of years later. This is not a claim of direct connection, but a recognition of a powerful symbolic thread, an idea so resonant it was reinvented time and again. The concept is that of the sacred upright stone, a mediator between the earthly and the divine. At Göbekli Tepe, these were stylized ancestors or deities. In ancient Egypt, this idea crystallized into the soaring obelisk, a petrified ray of the sun god capturing divine light. In Mesopotamia, rulers erected stone stelae, tall slabs carved with their images and laws, declaring their authority to both the people and the gods. Each culture used the form for its own purpose, yet the underlying principle remained, a stone finger pointing toward the heavens, anchoring the human realm to a higher order. This continuity hints at a deep cultural memory, a fragment of myth that survived the collapse of societies and the migration of peoples. Scholars of comparative mythology note a recurring archetype known as the axis mundi, the world axis or world tree. It is a central pillar that connects the underworld, the earth, and the sky, a conduit for spiritual travel and communication. The Norse spoke of Yggdrasil, the immense ash tree whose roots and branches hold the 9 worlds. Many Siberian and Central Asian traditions venerate the world pillar. Could the memory of the great T-shaped pillars, those stone beings at the dawn of time, have distilled into these later myths? It is a compelling possibility. The physical practice of erecting a central, sacred post or stone is a near-universal human gesture, from the totem poles of the Pacific Northwest to the lingams of Hindu tradition. Göbekli Tepe presents us with perhaps the earliest and most monumental evidence of this profound impulse. We can see a fascinating, though distant, cousin to this tradition in the later stone circles of Europe, like Stonehenge or the Ring of Brodgar. Built thousands of years after Göbekli Tepe was buried, they share no direct lineage, yet they fulfill a similar social and symbolic role. They are large-scale communal projects that transform the landscape into a ritual theater. Their layouts often incorporate celestial alignments, suggesting a deep desire to harmonize human ceremony with the cycles of the cosmos, a concept the builders of Göbekli Tepe likely understood in their own way. This long-term perspective is crucial. It shows that the breakthrough at that Turkish hilltop was not an isolated fluke or a dead end. It was an early, spectacular experiment in using monumental architecture to express a shared cosmology. The specific symbol of the pillar and the communal act of raising it proved to be an incredibly powerful and adaptable idea. It seeded a concept that would flower independently across continents and epochs, wherever humans felt the need to mark a place as sacred, to reach upward, and to build something permanent together. The legacy of Göbekli Tepe, therefore, is not just in the stones they left behind, but in the enduring human imagination they helped to shape. The world around Göbekli Tepe was itself being remade. As the last great ice sheets retreated, a climatic revolution swept across the globe, marking the transition from the harsh Pleistocene into the warmer, more stable Holocene epoch we live in today. In the region known as the Fertile Crescent, this shift was transformative. Cold, dry steppes gave way to a landscape of increasing rainfall and lush vegetation. Wild stands of wheat and barley flourished, and herds of gazelle and aurochs thrived in the expanding grasslands. This environmental bounty, a gift from a changing climate, is often seen as a fundamental catalyst. The theory of environmental determinism suggests that this new abundance may have provided the necessary stability. With more predictable food sources, hunter-gatherer groups could support larger populations and perhaps spend less time in a relentless daily search for sustenance. This created a potential surplus, not of grain in a storehouse, but of time, energy, and social capacity. It offered a golden window where people could invest in projects that did not yield immediate material returns, but profound spiritual and social ones. Paleoclimatologists who reconstruct ancient weather patterns from ice cores and sediment layers confirm that the site's main construction phases align almost perfectly with this period of climatic amelioration known as the pre-pottery Neolithic A. The environment, it seems, set a favorable stage, yet the relationship between climate and culture is never a simple one-way street. An equally compelling argument suggests that monument building was not just a product of abundance, but perhaps a response to the profound uncertainty that comes with any great change. The end of an ice age was not a smooth, gentle transition. It was a time of ecological rearrangement with shifting weather patterns, changing animal migrations, and new challenges. In the face of such instability, the act of coming together to erect something permanent and awe-inspiring may have served a crucial psychological purpose. It could have been a communal ritual to assert control, to appease the spiritual forces believed to govern the natural world, or to forge stronger social bonds as a buffer against an unpredictable environment. The temple, in this view, was not a celebration of plenty, but a bulwark against anxiety, a collective anchor in a world that was fundamentally transforming. This interplay reveals the profound complexity at the heart of Göbekli Tepe. It likely represents a unique convergence, a moment where favorable environmental conditions met a burgeoning, fully human capacity for symbolic thought and complex social organization. The abundance provided the means, but the shared belief provided the motive. It was the perfect storm where a stable enough landscape allowed a society to turn its gaze from mere survival toward the construction of meaning, setting in motion cultural currents that would flow for millennia. The stones they raised were a testament not just to what they could build, but to what they needed to believe in as their world changed around them. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe may hold a meaning far more specific than we first assumed. While we see foxes, vultures, and scorpions as art, for the people who placed them there, these could have been precise signs, a visual vocabulary understood across a wide region. This moves us into the realm of semiotics, the study of how signs and symbols convey meaning. In archaeology, this means looking beyond an image's beauty to ask if it functions like a word. The patterns at Göbekli Tepe are compelling. Certain animals appear repeatedly in specific contexts and combinations, a consistency that suggests they were not chosen at random. A boar might always face a particular direction, or a snake might consistently intertwine with a certain bird. This non-random distribution hints at a shared symbolic language, where each motif carried an agreed-upon significance, perhaps representing a clan, a natural force, or a part of a sacred story. Leading researchers are appropriately cautious. Without a Rosetta Stone to translate these images, we cannot read them. Yet experts widely agree that this highly standardized iconography represents a monumental leap in cognitive development. It shows a society capable of abstracting complex ideas into consistent visual forms and transmitting those forms accurately across generations. This is a foundational step on the long road to writing. To understand this, we can look at a later example. Thousands of years after Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Europe, the Vinca culture created artifacts marked with a set of recurring symbols, now called the Vinca symbols. These are not a true writing system, but they demonstrate a similar use of standardized signs that may have denoted ownership, ritual concepts, or clan identities. Göbekli Tepe's animal iconography operates in a similar conceptual space. It is a proto-script, a system of symbolic notation that could communicate layered meanings to the initiated. This reframes a major historical narrative. We often think writing emerged from practical bureaucracy, from the need to record taxes, trade, and harvests in the first cities. But Göbekli Tepe suggests a different, more profound origin story. The drive to encode meaning in symbols may have first surged from the human need to preserve ritual, to solidify mythology, and to maintain the sacred stories that held a far-flung community together. The temple was not just a place of gathering. It may have been a living archive, its pillars serving as immutable tablets where the core tenets of their belief system were set in stone, literally, for all to see and remember. This advanced symbolic communication was another form of innovation radiating from that ancient hill, proving that the quest to share complex thought is as old as civilization itself. Other ancient wonders were not so fortunate. The pyramids were stripped of their gleaming limestone casings. The great library of Alexandria burned. Countless tombs have been emptied by looters, their stories scattered and lost forever. The pristine condition of Göbekli Tepe is nothing short of an archaeological miracle, a gift delivered across 12 millennia by two separate acts of profound care. The first was the deliberate, reverent burial by its builders, a protective shroud of earth that shielded the delicate carvings from wind, rain, and later human interference. The second stroke of fortune was its modern discovery in an era committed to preservation, before treasure hunters or rushed excavations could strip its context away. This dual legacy means that when archaeologists brush the soil from a pillar, they are often the first to see its carvings since the day they were hidden, an almost sacred moment of reconnection. This privilege comes with immense responsibility, shaping every aspect of how the site is studied today. The ongoing work, a collaboration between the German Archaeological Institute and Turkish authorities, is a masterclass in patient, ethical archaeology. Gone are the days of simply digging for spectacular objects. The goal now is to recover information, to understand the precise sequence of events, the tool marks on a stone, the microscopic pollen in a layer of fill. Teams work with dental picks and brushes, documenting the position of every fragment, because a single animal bone found between two stones can tell a story about the feast that accompanied their erection. This meticulous methodology treats the site as a complex historical document, where context is everything. To peer into the earth without disturbing it, researchers employ non-invasive technologies like ground-penetrating radar. These scans have revealed something astonishing: the outlines of perhaps 20 more monumental circles still sleeping beneath the adjacent fields. This hidden geography promises that Göbekli Tepe is far more than the few enclosures we have seen. It is an entire ritual landscape, a sacred district that will take decades, perhaps centuries, to fully uncover. Each future excavation will be guided by the questions raised by the last, in a slow, deliberate conversation with the past. Preserving what is already exposed presents its own profound challenges. The soft limestone of the pillars, once protected underground, is now vulnerable to sun, wind, and even the humidity from the breath of visitors. Conservationists employ gentle techniques to stabilize the stone, monitoring cracks and applying protective shelters that shield the carvings without obscuring them. The site's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018 provides a crucial global framework for this stewardship, ensuring protection, sustainable tourism, and international support for its care. This careful, slow approach is not a delay, it is a promise. It ensures that Göbekli Tepe will continue to yield its secrets to future generations armed with technologies we cannot yet imagine, allowing the story of human origins to be rewritten not just once, but over and over again, with ever greater clarity and respect for those who first dared to build toward the sky. Across the globe, in the millennia following the last great ice, other stones were being raised. From the massive shell mounds of North America's Poverty Point to the subterranean temples carved into Malta's limestone, humanity seemed to be stirring with a similar impulse. This was not a single story, but a chorus of beginnings. To understand the singular voice of Göbekli Tepe, we must listen to this wider chorus, placing its ancient stones on a map of emerging human ambition. What we see is a fascinating puzzle. These sites are separated by vast oceans and continents, built by cultures with no possible contact, yet they emerge within a surprisingly narrow window of deep time, roughly between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago. This pattern suggests something profound about our species in that post-Ice Age world. As climates stabilized and environments became more generous, diverse human societies, independently, began to turn their collective energy toward reshaping their landscapes in permanent, meaningful ways. It was as if a threshold had been crossed, not of technology, but of imagination. This brings us to a central question in archaeology, the debate between independent innovation and diffusion. Did the idea of monumentality spark in one place and slowly spread across the world through migration and contact? Or did this capacity emerge spontaneously in separate human societies when conditions were right? The global distribution and stark cultural differences between these early sites strongly support independent innovation. The temples of Malta, like Haga Kim, built around 5,600 years ago, are masterpieces of corbelled stone architecture, often aligned with solar events. They were constructed by an agricultural society that had been farming for millennia. On the other side of the world, at a site like Watson Brake in Louisiana, around 5,400 years ago, hunter-gatherers built a complex arrangement of 11 earthen mounds, not for burial but for ceremonial gatherings. The materials, methods, and likely beliefs behind these projects are entirely distinct. This tells us that monumentality is not a single invention to be traced, but a potential within human social organization that can be realized in strikingly different forms. When we place Göbekli Tepe directly beside its most famous cousins, its radical profile comes into even sharper focus. Take Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, which ends from around 7,500 BCE. It was a dense farming settlement, a hive of domestic life where ritual was centered in the home, with burials under platforms and vivid wall paintings. Its monumentality was one of density, of community living. Göbekli Tepe, by stark contrast, shows no evidence of permanent dwelling. It was a specialized, non-domestic ritual center built by non-farmers. Then consider Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain, whose famous stone phase began around 4,500 years ago. While its builders were also not part of a centralized state, they were pastoralists and farmers living in a landscape dotted with permanent settlements. Stonehenge is a celestial clock, an astronomical computer in stone, reflecting a deep preoccupation with cosmic cycles. Göbekli Tepe's carvings speak a different language, one of animal spirits and ancestral presences, its primary focus seemingly on the living world of nature and myth, not the precise movements of the sun and moon. The differences extend into the very fabric of construction. The megaliths of Europe, like those at Karnak in France, often use single, large stones erected in rows or circles, sometimes with minimal shaping. The technique at Göbekli Tepe was far more sculptural. Its pillars were quarried as rectangular monoliths and then meticulously carved into specific T-shapes and decorated with high-relief art, a level of artistic investment rarely seen at such an early date. The social organization implied is different too. Many later monuments, from the pyramids to ziggurats, clearly reflect hierarchical societies with a powerful elite directing labor. Göbekli Tepe, as we have explored, hints at a more collective, non-hierarchical effort, a communal project for a communal belief system. This comparative view does not diminish Göbekli Tepe. It elevates it. It shows that while the human drive to build big emerged in many places, the specific combination of factors at that Turkish hilltop, its extreme antiquity, its pre-agricultural context, its sophisticated iconography, and its apparent social structure remains, for now, unparalleled in the archaeological record. It stands not as an absolute singularity, but as the earliest and most dramatic expression of a deep human potential, a proof that the urge to gather and build meaning into the world is a fundamental part of who we are, a story that would be written and rewritten in stone and earth across the globe for thousands of years to come. Religion, often seen as a cultural ornament, might have been the very scaffold upon which civilization was built. This is the radical economic proposition of Göbekli Tepe, a model where spiritual need, not material desperation, becomes the primary driver of progress. To understand this, we must step away from the image of the starving hunter-gatherer stumbling upon a wheat stalk. Instead, picture a society already rich in social and symbolic complexity, a society that had built a cathedral. The maintenance of that sacred center and the seasonal gatherings it demanded created a new kind of problem, a logistical challenge of unprecedented scale. How do you feed hundreds of people who have traveled to a specific place at a specific time for a specific purpose? The answer required innovation. Economic anthropologists point to a concept known as the work feast model. The monumental labor of quarrying, carving, and erecting the pillars was itself a ritual act, a form of devotion. But to sustain that devotion, the community had to provision the workers. This created a predictable, large-scale demand for food that could not be met by casual, day-to-day foraging. It required planning, coordination, and a shift toward resource intensification. The wild ancestors of einkorn and emmer wheat grew abundantly on those very hills. To ensure a reliable supply for the ritual feasts, it is logical that people began to manage these wild grasses more carefully. They might have cleared competing plants, protected the best stands, and later deliberately sown saved seeds in favorable areas. This was not farming as we picture it, with fenced fields and plows. It was a gentle nudge, a series of conscious choices made to serve a ceremonial calendar. Each step, from scheduled gathering to organized harvest, laid the groundwork for the economic structures we associate with civilization. Specialized roles would have emerged not just for shamans or artists, but for skilled flint knappers making tools, for organizers coordinating hunting parties, and for those with the knowledge to process and store vast quantities of wild grain. The temple, therefore, acted as a social and economic accelerator. It created a centralized reason for surplus, for labor coordination, and for the development of proto-administrative skills like scheduling and resource management. This flips the traditional narrative on its head. Spirituality was not a leisurely pursuit made possible by farming. It was a demanding, innovative project that pulled humanity into a new, more intensive relationship with the environment. The desire to connect with the divine, to build something eternal, may have been the very force that compelled us to learn to domesticate the world around us, setting in motion an ecological partnership and eventually a transformation whose profound consequences we are still navigating today. The human form is strikingly absent at Göbekli Tepe, yet hauntingly present. While the great T-shaped pillars are abstract beings, a few miles away a discovery was made that brings us face to face with an individual from that same ancient world. Known as the Urfa Man, this statue is a masterpiece of Neolithic art, carved from limestone with a lifelike posture, hands clasped over its chest. Its most arresting feature is its eyes, once inlaid with gleaming shards of black obsidian that would have caught the firelight with an unsettling, living gaze. Dated to the same epoch as the early phases of Göbekli Tepe, this statue is considered one of the oldest known naturalistic human sculptures in the world. Its proximity and age suggest a deep cultural connection, a shared artistic tradition that could portray the human figure with profound reverence, even as the temple itself chose abstraction. This contrast is our first clue. At the ritual center, human identity was distilled into symbolic form, the T-shape, while elsewhere, individual likeness could be captured with startling intimacy. This duality invites a challenging question, one that archaeologists grapple with constantly. How do we interpret gender and identity in art from a world without written labels? The pillars themselves offer no clear answer. They lack overt sexual characteristics, their human qualities implied by the carved arms, hands, and belts on an otherwise minimalist form. This deliberate ambiguity is meaningful. It suggests that within the sacred space, the primary identity of these stone beings was not as male or female individuals, but as ancestors, guardians, or perhaps ritual participants whose power transcended such categories. The animal imagery that dominates the site supports this interpretation. If the pillars represent clan totems or spiritual forces, then the social structure reflected might be one organized around kinship groups linked to specific animals, like the fox clan or the vulture clan, rather than around a hierarchy of gendered rulers. Expert analysis of hunter-gatherer societies from the ethnographic record often reveals more fluid and complementary gender roles than those found in later, densely populated agricultural states. In many such groups, survival depends on the contributions of all members, with leadership often situational and authority diffused. The monumental labor at Göbekli Tepe, requiring coordinated effort from an entire community, aligns with this model. It points to a society where the ability to organize, to inspire, and to execute a shared vision likely came from respected individuals within a collective framework, not from a solitary king or chief whose image would be immortalized in stone. This leads to a profound reflection. The absence of clear human idols celebrating individual power and the ambiguity of gender in its sacred art might indicate a social world where authority was rooted in the ritual circle itself. Leadership could have been rotational, drawn from those with specific knowledge or spiritual connection, their status temporary and granted by the community for the purpose of the gathering. In such a structure, the temple was not a monument to a person, but to the collective act of building it. The power resided in the process, in the coming together, and in the shared story that every carved animal helped to tell. This ambiguity is not a lack of evidence, but a different kind of evidence. It invites us to imagine a social architecture as innovative as the stone circles, one built on participation and shared purpose, a reminder that the paths not taken in history are as revealing as the ones that led to our modern world. Göbekli Tepe now belongs to the world, its image reaching far beyond the pages of academic journals. It appears in blockbuster documentaries, its pillars featured on book covers that promise revelations about lost civilizations, and its name whispered in the narratives of popular video games as a place of ancient power. This site has become a modern icon, a blank screen onto which we project our deepest curiosities about where we came from and what forgotten truths might lie buried. Why does this particular hilltop, more than any other archaeological discovery, hold such a powerful grip on our collective imagination? The answer lies in its unique narrative utility. In an age where so much seems known and mapped, Göbekli Tepe stands as a legitimate, monumental question mark. It is not a myth, but a fact that actively dismantles a long-held story of human progress. This makes it the perfect vessel, equally compelling for rigorous science and for speculative fiction. It provides a solid foundation of real, astonishing mystery upon which endless stories can be built, from tales of advanced prehistoric societies to warnings of forgotten cataclysms. Science communicators often highlight this dual role. They note the immense value in having a genuine archaeological wonder capture public attention, as it opens a doorway for millions to engage with prehistory. Yet they also emphasize the responsibility that comes with this spotlight. The goal is to translate complex research into accessible wonder without letting that wonder drift completely free from the anchor of evidence. Balancing the site's true, earth-shattering implications with the allure of more sensational theories is a constant, necessary dialogue. We can see this cultural impact in specific, tangible ways. The discovery and popularization of Göbekli Tepe have sparked a measurable resurgence of public interest in deep human history. Museum exhibitions on the Neolithic now draw larger crowds. University archaeology programs report increased enrollment from students citing such sites as their inspiration. This renewed fascination demonstrates that the past is not a static list of dates, but a living, breathing puzzle that invites participation. This legacy, however, is double-edged. Popularization can sometimes simplify or distort, spreading ideas that prioritize drama over data. Yet, even this has an unintended benefit. The widespread recognition creates a global constituency for the site. It generates public will and funding for its ongoing preservation and meticulous study. People care about what they know, and they fight to protect what captures their imagination. In this way, the stories we tell about Göbekli Tepe, both factual and fictional, ensure that the real stones continue to be guarded and probed by scientists. The conversation between the hard evidence of the past and the boundless creativity of the present is what keeps history alive. It reminds us that our understanding is always provisional, always ready to be rewritten by the next brush of sand from a stone, or the next generation looking at an ancient pillar and daring to ask a new question. The tools that built this temple were not made of bronze or iron, but of flint and obsidian, materials shaped by a knowledge as precise as any modern engineering. To hold a replica of a Neolithic berren, a chisel-like tool of dark, sharpened stone, is to feel the weight of a profound patience. Its edge is keen, its form efficient, yet it seems almost absurdly humble against the ambition of carving a 20-ton pillar. This was the paradox of their technology, a mastery that appears deceptively simple. At the site, archaeologists have recovered not just a few tools, but tens of thousands of them, a vast toolkit left behind by the generations who worked there. Alongside finely crafted spear points for hunting, they found heavy-duty picks and mauls made from dense limestone, their surfaces worn smooth from relentless pounding against the bedrock. Each tool tells a story of specific purpose. Lithic analysts, specialists in ancient stone tools, examine microscopic wear patterns under high-powered lenses. The scars on a heavy maul speak of crushing blows used to fracture limestone at the quarry. The polished edge of a smaller chert scraper reveals the long, smoothing strokes that dressed a pillar's surface. The fine, precise tip of an obsidian berren shows the meticulous scoring and pecking that brought a coiled serpent to life from solid rock. This division of labor is a silent testimony to craft specialization. It was not a matter of everyone grabbing the same rock. Certain individuals likely developed deep expertise in quarrying, others in the art of fine relief carving, their skills honed over a lifetime and passed down. The process itself was a monumental exercise in applied physics and perseverance. It likely began at a nearby limestone plateau, the source of the megaliths. Workers may have used fire to heat the stone surface, then doused it with water, exploiting thermal shock to create cracks. They would then drive wooden wedges into these fissures, soaking the wood to make it expand, gradually prying a massive slab free from the earth. Once extracted, the rough block was transported, likely on log rollers and with ropes made of plant fibers, to the hilltop building site. There, the real artistry began. Using harder stones as hammers, craftsmen would have pecked away at the surface, a technique called percussion flaking, slowly defining the shape of the T. For the final smoothing and the intricate carvings, they switched to finer tools, grinding the surface with sand and water as an abrasive, and using delicate pressure flaking to incise the details of a fox's fur or a vulture's wing. Each curve, each line was the product of countless patient strikes. This technological insight forces a profound shift in perspective. We often measure progress by the complexity of materials, from stone to bronze to steel. But the builders of Göbekli Tepe demonstrate that the true sophistication lay not in the substance of the tool, but in the knowledge behind its use, in the social organization that deployed hundreds of skilled hands in concert, and in the shared vision that made such painstaking labor meaningful. Their intellectual and social technology, the blueprint in their minds and the community in their hearts, was every bit as advanced as the physical act of construction. This realization invites us to look beyond the temple's grandeur to the quieter, more intimate traces left behind, to the very dust of their daily lives still clinging to the floors where they gathered and feasted. The hill still holds most of its secrets. Archaeologists working at Göbekli Tepe today stand on a landscape humming with unseen potential, knowing that beneath their feet lies not just soil, but a buried city of stone circles waiting for their moment of rediscovery. Geophysical surveys using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies have painted a startling picture of the subsurface. The few monumental enclosures uncovered so far are not the entirety of the site, they are merely the introduction. The scans reveal the ghostly outlines of perhaps 20 more similar structures, massive T-shaped pillars and their surrounding walls, still perfectly preserved in their earthy tomb. This means the known site, already revolutionary, could be just a small fraction of a vast ritual complex, a sacred district that stretched across the entire plateau. The next trench, the next careful brushstroke of the trowel, could reveal a pillar taller, with carvings more intricate and enigmatic than any we have yet seen. The sense of anticipation within the archaeological community is palpable, a quiet understanding that the story is far from complete. This anticipation is tempered by a profound and patient philosophy. Modern excavation at such a sensitive site is not a race. It is a deliberate, strategic partnership with the future. The guiding principle is to dig only what is necessary to answer specific questions and to leave as much as possible untouched for the scientists of tomorrow. Why? Because the technologies of analysis are advancing at a breathtaking pace. A soil sample taken today and carefully archived might, in 20 years, be scanned with instruments that can detect the faintest traces of ancient plant DNA, revealing exactly which wild grains were processed here, or even the microbial signature of the people who gathered. A layer left in place might one day be examined with a three-dimensional imaging technique we cannot yet conceive, revealing its story without ever disturbing a single grain of sediment. This long-term view is an act of humility and hope. It acknowledges that our current tools, as sophisticated as they seem, are likely primitive compared to what our descendants will wield. By excavating slowly and preserving meticulously, we are building a bridge of knowledge across centuries, ensuring that future generations can continue the conversation with this ancient place. The specific questions that guide this careful work are as compelling as the site itself. First, is there a central, older heart? The enclosures uncovered so far appear to be from different phases, but could there be a foundational circle, perhaps simpler and even more ancient, at the very core of the complex? Finding it would give us a clearer starting point for this entire architectural tradition. Second, where did the builders live during their seasonal gatherings? The absence of permanent housing at the site itself is a key part of its mystery. Future excavations in the surrounding valleys and hills may finally uncover the temporary camps or more substantial seasonal settlements that housed the thousands of participants, offering a window into their domestic lives alongside their monumental achievements. Third, what is the full scope of their symbolic language? Every new pillar uncovered expands the bestiary. Will we find entirely new animal species carved in stone, or abstract symbols that help us finally crack the code of their meaning? Each new image is a potential word in a lost lexicon. The methods that will answer these questions are evolving from the speculative to the practical. Beyond traditional digging, researchers are pioneering techniques in microarchaeology, sifting through excavated soil to find phytoliths, the microscopic silica skeletons of plants which can tell us what was growing, cooking, or being used for ritual. Residue analysis on the few stone vessels found might detect traces of fermented drinks or special foods consumed during ceremonies, and digital technology is opening entirely new frontiers. High-resolution, three-dimensional laser scanning of every stone and layer is creating a perfect virtual replica of the site, a digital twin that can be studied remotely by experts across the globe. This data can then fuel immersive virtual reality reconstructions, allowing anyone, anywhere, to stand within a fully realized stone circle as it might have appeared 12,000 years ago, complete with the sounds of chanting and the flicker of torchlight on carved beasts. This democratizes the experience, making this profound piece of human heritage accessible to all. This forward-looking perspective frames Göbekli Tepe not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing narrative. Its greatest contribution to history may not be the pillars we have already seen, but the ones still sleeping beneath the wheat fields. Each future discovery holds the potential to challenge our assumptions once again, to offer a new piece of the puzzle that is our collective origin. The site teaches us patience, mirroring the patience of its original builders. It reminds us that understanding deep time requires a corresponding depth of care. The story of human beginnings is still being written, one careful brushstroke at a time, and the next sentence may be waiting just beneath the next layer of earth. The stones of Göbekli Tepe ask us to reconsider the very arrow of time we use to measure ourselves. For centuries, the story of humanity has been told as a steady climb from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced, a linear march culminating in our modern, technological world. This narrative subtly places our current society at the pinnacle of a long, inevitable ascent. But what if history is not a ladder, but a vast and intricate tapestry? What if the threads of art, spirituality, and monumental cooperation were woven into the human fabric long before the patterns we recognize as civilization even appeared? This site, built by hunter-gatherers, unravels the assumption that later always means better, or that material complexity is the sole measure of a society's success. It reveals a forgotten peak in the deep past, a flourishing of human capacity in a context our textbooks labeled as simple. This is the heart of non-linear history, the understanding that human societies have always experimented with wildly different ways of living, organizing, and finding meaning. Some of these experiments, like the one on that Turkish hilltop, were profound successes that we simply lost sight of, buried not just by soil, but by our own narrow definitions of progress. Philosophers of history have long cautioned against viewing the past as a mere prelude to the present. Thinkers like Oswald Spengler and Arnold Toynbee spoke of cultures as organic entities, each with its own springtime, summer, and winter, rather than as steps on a single staircase. In this light, Göbekli Tepe is not a crude prototype of later temples. It is the magnificent, mature expression of its own unique cultural spring, a society that solved the fundamental human questions of belonging and purpose in a way we are only beginning to comprehend. Its builders mastered a form of social complexity without the apparent need for kings, slaves, or vast inequalities. They achieved artistic and architectural sophistication without metal, wheels, or written language. This forces a humbling realization. The capacities we often consider the hallmarks of an advanced civilization, long-term planning, abstract symbolic thought, large-scale cooperation, were not inventions of the agricultural age. They were innate human potentials that could be activated and directed in many different directions under many different social contracts. The most striking lesson is not in what they built, but in what they chose to build. These people directed their greatest collective effort, their surplus of labor and ingenuity, toward a project of shared meaning and spiritual connection. They invested in community and cosmology, not in storehouses of wealth or monuments to individual power. In doing so, they present a powerful alternative model of what a society can prioritize and still be considered, by any meaningful measure, a resounding success. Their legacy holds up a mirror to our own era. We live in a time of unparalleled technological and material progress, yet we often grapple with a deep sense of social fragmentation and existential unease. Göbekli Tepe quietly asks us a reflective question. In our relentless pursuit of economic growth and technological mastery, have we neglected other fundamental human needs that these ancient builders so spectacularly fulfilled? The need to create beauty together, to participate in a story larger than ourselves, to forge our identities through shared ritual rather than through individual consumption. Their stones do not offer a blueprint for a return to some imagined past. They offer a perspective, a reminder that the human journey has always been about more than survival and accumulation. It has been, and perhaps must always be, about the ongoing collective project of making meaning. What we choose to build and why we choose to build it remains the most telling signature of any age. Göbekli Tepe stands as a permanent testament, a 12,000-year-old question etched into the bedrock of our past. It is not merely a ruin, but a revolution in stone, a discovery that has irrevocably altered the timeline and narrative of our shared origins. We have walked from that first shocking glimpse of carved pillars to the profound mystery of their deliberate burial. We have traced the meaning in the animal carvings and grappled with the revolutionary social model they imply. A world where temple builders came before farmers, where collective belief organized labor long before kings commanded it. The overarching theme now shines with clarity: the human capacity for creating meaning, for weaving community around a shared story, is not a cultural luxury. It appears as a primary shaping force in our history, an engine that may have driven practical innovation rather than simply resulting from it. This turns the traditional story of civilization inside out. The first chapters were not written by hunger alone, but by a hunger for connection, for understanding our place in a living, symbolic world. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who first recognized the site's staggering age, once reflected that Göbekli Tepe is not the Garden of Eden, but it might be the Garden of Eden's workshop. It is the place where humanity, while still living closely with the wild, first experimented on a grand scale with the tools of society, spirituality, and art, tools that would eventually reshape the planet. Let this site be a lasting reminder that history is not a settled fact, but a living inquiry. Our ancestors were far more complex, creative, and profound than our old textbooks ever allowed. They were not primitive survivors waiting for progress to happen to them. They were the architects of their own world, builders who looked at a bare hill and saw a cathedral. Reflecting on this new origin story quietly changes our perception of human potential. It asks us to look at the monuments of our own age, the vast projects we undertake together, and to consider what foundational beliefs, what shared stories are truly moving our stones. The silent sentinels of Göbekli Tepe have rewritten our past. Perhaps in their enduring silence, they have something to whisper about our future as well.